Joe, it's lovely to see you again. Thank you very much for joining us today on the radio as we're doing another special for 1950s Women's CEDAW.
It's always my pleasure, Ian. Thank you for the invitation.
So, CEDAWinLAW has claimed a victory against all those that have opposed 1950s women. Does this mean that all 3.5 million 1950s women victims can expect restitution?
Well, an eminent KC once said the law is a slingshot to bring down Goliath. Rich and poor, weak and strong, all are subject to it and equal before it. At least that's the idea. The reality is more complicated. So, in essence, we have everything required to secure a remedy for all 50s women. And as he said, the reality is more complicated. There's nothing standing in our way except, let's call them a cabal of people who would prefer 50s women did not receive their own dues, well, their full restitution. But actually, we thank them because what they do is they keep us on our toes and more creative and energized to secure the goals that we've laid out.
CEDAWinLAW's unique winning hand of substantive arguments sit at the zenith of issues raised, yet the mainstream media never mentions the legal rights of all 1950s women. Why?
Well, that's a very good question, Ian, because time and time again they refer to the issue and quote another group. So they're publishing unbalanced articles, which, well, if you look at the publishing standards, or if they looked at them, they need to revise their position, is the bottom line, because CEDAWinLAW's position is, as if you said, is at the zenith of the issue in hand. We have the legal rights, the moral imperative, the ethics. We've got everything uniquely to win the day. So why are they not interested in writing about it? We can't make it out. We've actually written to some of them, and all we get is obfuscation, really. That's the bottom line. But one day, when 50s women secure their earned dues, they will want to write about how that came about, and that will include CEDAWinLAW's winning hand, unique winning hand, that we've gained over 10 years of our first JR, and we've spoken about the Wednesbury unreasonableness of the Supreme Court decision there, and Dr. Scott's paper where she challenged that decision, righteously challenged that decision. And then we've got two tribunals that incidentally were hosted live, broadcast live out of London during the pandemic with eminent pro bono KCs, barristers, global witnesses, victims. I mean, it was a phenomenal piece of work. Oh, you know, the president's report and the judge's report. And in those three things that I've mentioned is the evidence, the enforceable evidence that is in play at the moment. Also, we've got last year's CEDAWinLAW JR, which is now postponed. It isn't abandoned, it's just postponed. And, you know, we're using that as leverage to get, as well as the other three things I've mentioned, to get mediation, to bring people to the table. And CEDAW Treaty GR40 is about women leading at those decision tables. It's an international treaty that is in play. So we've quoted that as well. And then there's the CPR, the Civic Procedure Rules on Alternative Dispute Resolution and Mediation. I mean, you couldn't ask for any more of a winning hand than the one we're playing to get 50s women's restitution. But the media is ignoring us. The government has displayed its position on this, the current government and the previous one, by repeatedly rejecting possibly limited, what they call flawed PHSO reports by government and government lawyers. But, you know, we're in a supreme position here, and it's all about the money, really. And those people that I spoke about not wishing to see 50s women have their own dues returned. And it's just a story that will be told. Right now, we're waiting to see developments to everything we've done. I really don't know. It's so illogical not to use the legal rights of 50s women. It just doesn't make any sense not to come to mediation, because mediation is where you have legal advisors looking at early neutral evaluation, position statements, and working out a mechanism for compensation that all parties agree to. So what's the problem? Because they're saying something's going to be done. That might end up being Sir John Hayes' begging bowl at the DWP, which is wholly unacceptable, and we will never agree to that. There's a compromise to be had here, and that's what we're looking to do.
Thank you, Jo. Yes, you mentioned 10 years. I know that it's been 7 years since I think we've been featuring CEDAW and Back to 60 on the radio. So that's the length of time you mentioned there. It is a long time.
Yeah, and thanks to you, Ian, because what you've done for 50s women is unique. And Salford City Radio and you have highlighted this epic injustice that others fear to mention. It's because it's women. Women are always the bottom of the list. Always. People talk about women's rights, but they're all talking shops as far as we're concerned. And what we need is deeds, not words.
And to move on to the third question, Jo, CEDAWinLAW has a top 500 ranked team of mediators on standby to be considered for the neutral role. As friends of the court, what would CEDAWinLAW now like to see?
Well, yes, we have submitted papers to the court in amicus curiae, which is friends of the court, and an application for a cost capping order to say this is additional evidence to that which the court already has, and please would they like to consider it. So what we would like to see out of that is leadership in bringing about mandatory mediation, and the court does have the power to do that, especially because back in the day the former Secretary of State for Work and Pensions unlawfully refused CEDAWinLAW's reasonable invitation to join mediation, which puts the current incumbent in jeopardy of a clear case of being held against her. And with the Master of the Rolls and the Attorney General's latest guidance, the Master of the Rolls has said that mediation, we applaud his views on mediation is the bottom line, that's the brief version. And the Attorney General has said to government lawyers, if you give government ministers advice and they don't follow it, I'd like to know about it. So they're welcome views, let's put it that way. And, mediation is the most efficient, cost-effective and just route to resolution. We say mediation, not litigation. There's the legal and the moral obligations here, and the ethical ones that Dr. Scott has clearly pointed out in her reports, the President's report and the Judge's report. And they've both been lauded on one occasion by the co-chair of the APPG, who said they lay out in black and white what 50s women have faced, the discrimination they've faced. I mean, we're in readiness to return to the court if no meaningful action is taken. But as I said, we're looking for mediation, not litigation. 50s women have had enough of years and years of observing the dynamics here. And there's been enough talking, more than enough talking. And these so-called debates where only one side of the issue is ever discussed, we've called that out. Everybody knows that right now the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions has announced this review of the state pension age, and many people are up in arms about it, rightly so. But where were those people when it happened to 50s women? Where were they? Now it's happening to them. We warned them what was going to happen, and it fell on deaf ears apparently. Well, Richard Murphy has said about the rigged system He said it's rigged for the wealthy against vulnerable. Lord Rooker has said that the National Insurance Fund is fraudulent. David Henke has written about it on the back of Tony Lyons, the late Tony Lyons' observations in the matter. Paul Lewis of it has even, at BBC Moneybox Live, has said, where's the £400 billion missing from the National Insurance Fund? We have an FOI proving that the National Insurance Fund paid off the national debt, a humongous figure. David Henke said about the £271 billion missing out of the National Insurance Fund. When you're talking about sums like that, and then the government has the audacity to talk about raising the state pension age because the populace is living longer. I mean, it's just illogical. It just doesn't add up. There's plenty of money. It's about priorities. It really is about priorities. And I would say right now, any 50s woman that accepts the proposal of a begging bowl and queuing at the DWP to prove her eligibility for what is essentially crumbs will rue the day, because what is coming down the line is not only a raising state pension age. You know, they're talking about taking away again and winter fuel allowance. They're taxing pensioners now. Their social care that they've paid for, citizens have paid for decades, you know, is no longer in hand. You have to pay for that. The NHS is nothing what it once was. It's very difficult to get the services you need from the NHS. Dentistry is privatised. If you're on a static income and now to be taxed, you're not going to be able to afford all the things that you've paid for all your life through tax and national insurance contributions. We saw an article the other day about you last about 7 years. Well, let me tell you, 50s women in particular, 7 years, any 50s woman who had to wait up to 6 years and has now had many of them, 1.7 million of them, disabled, they'll likely have PIP and UC removed. But I don't know what they're living on. I really don't know what they're living on. 7 years is for the birds. Seriously.
Yeah.
50s women are in debt. We know that homelessness is spiked, and we wonder how many 50s women are, for instance, sofa surfing, living with their children or other relatives or friends because they can't cope. And this is what happens to 50s women and anybody who's approaching pension age. This is what they're probably looking at as well. Equity release. The figures for equity release have skyrocketed, people taking out loans against their property, which then obliges them to pay for social care if, as and when they're taken into care. Yeah, everything that was the cradle to grave welfare state from Bevan and Beveridge set up after the war is now dissolved into oblivion. So if you don't stand up for your state pension and any other or all of these entitlements, ask yourself, where will you be in 5 years' time? Where will you be? Do the projections on your household budget and see where you'll be without those support systems. Honestly, we've got a fabulous win in hand, and anybody who doesn't support CEDAWinLAW's win in hand is looking at what I've described, broadly speaking. That's what they're looking at. Yes, there are people who are above that line, who will keep their heads above the water just. There are others. Lord Prem Sikka has talked about democide of the elderly. David Henke has written about the same subject. This is not my view that I'm expressing here. They're views of eminent people who understand this system in detail. And they're the views of 50s women who write to us fearfully, worrying about their status right now and where they're going. and they talk about the health issues, how it's damaged their health, not being able to get the NHS dentistry services they need, fearful that their property is going to be seized if they do have to go into care, which means, incidentally, that any beneficiaries in their wills will lose out. There are other people who are in rented accommodation. They're not going to be able to pay their bills without, if they're disabled, 50s women who are disabled in rented accommodation. Where are they going to be? There are so many questions. The impact of the state pension age deferrals on 50s women, that there was no impact statements. There was no warning. It was done suddenly, swiftly, stealthily, and steeply in 2010 by David Cameron and the leader of the Lib Dems, Nick Clegg. And Labour promised so much before it got into power. And what is it saying now? Well, frankly, successive governments, in the eyes of victims, 50s women victims, are shameless. That's what they tell us. We have no faith in democracy. We have no faith in MPs. They make promises and don't keep them. John McDonnell in 2019 said he was going to £50 billion he promised to settle this debt of honour. Now he doesn't want to talk about it. Well, John is a well-regarded man, and we wonder how that change in his MO has come about, why he would go from saying it's a debt of honour, which they will meet, the Labour Party, as he was Shadow Chancellor then, to where he is now. What are the circumstances in which MPs have to operate that they can't speak their mind, that they fall from grace, so to speak? You know, we'd like to understand that.
Yeah.
Because the whips operate and instruct MPs how to respond to issues, let's say.
Yeah.
But what puzzles us is why they respond. Yeah, they'll lose the whip. And yeah, recently half a dozen lost the whip and were reinstated. But if they all stood together, they'd be far more powerful. They tell all the 50s women stand together, but they don't do it themselves.
Yeah.
They have done it recently for the disabled people, for PIP and Universal Credit, but they could have easily done likewise for 50s women.
Yeah. I was just wondering, Joe, I'd like to thank you for all the work you do for 1950s women and supporting them for all this time and giving people hope.
Well, without our great team of veteran volunteers, loyal veteran volunteers, all the experts, the pro bono legal advisors and the paid legal advisors, we wouldn't be where we are. But we're really proud of our winning hand, and we're claiming victory here with that winning hand. And we say to 50s women, write to the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions and call for mediation, because if you don't, what I've tried to explain here today is what you're looking at. And that's not my view. That's the view of people who have been in Parliament for a lifetime, and experts who talk about the impact of barbaric policies. It just is soul destroying. It's soul destroying to know that in our beautiful country, that the system is rigged, as Richard Murphy has said, in favour of the wealthy. It just is truly, soul destroying.
Yeah.
We would welcome any dynamic on behalf of 50s women that brings about a financial remedy, a compromise for them. And yes, that is solely focused on 50s women, that response. But there are so many concerns to be discussed, to be resolved.
Yeah.
We like to remain focused. So if, as and when, a dynamic presents itself, that provides 50s women, that has the capacity to provide 50s women with what their property, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, let's
Thanks
go.
very much.